All right, let's take you back to Sandton, where the Nelson Mandela Foundation is currently hosting a tribute event honoring the life and legacy of civil rights leader Reverend Jesse Jackson. The gathering is reflecting on his support for South Africa's liberation struggle, his relationship with Dr. Nelson Mandela, as well as his role in advancing global justice as well as human dignity. Let's listen in.
Of condolence to the family to do so. So we will have a roving mic and we'll invite a few people to say a few words. To begin our program, we'd like to invite you to watch a short video of Reverend Jackson when he visited this foundation following the passing of Madiba in 2013. He was standing in this very room when he gave this speech, from which we'd like to show you an excerpt. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to talk a bit about this long journey from apartheid to freedom, an even longer journey from freedom to equality. I'm struggling tonight to fight for the narrative, the privileged life of Mr. Mandela and those with whom he worked. But there's an attempt in his death to do what they could not do in life, take away his story. The man expanded a movement of which he was a part and seized the moment. I was blessed to be here in 1979 on the deep, dark days of apartheid, and back again in 1990 when Mr. Mandela was released from prison that Sunday, to meet him first as an American, and then to be here for the inauguration in 1994. And my first point, I do not want us to separate Mr. Mandela from the ANC or from the Mbekis and the Sisulus with whom he found companionship. He met us to the hall and said, "Jess, my boy, welcome, freedom fighter." And they asked about Randall Roberts and other American freedom fighters. The issue is not how much he changed in jail, but how much South Africa changed because he was jailed. When his body was freed, the world shook. When his spirit was released, the world shook again. There's a suggestion that he matured in jail and became a different man. Madiba didn't change his ideals. White supremacy lost its authority and changed their response from annihilation to coexistence. He did not go to jail as some out-of-control youth who needed to be matured. He went as a freedom fighter and came out as a freedom fighter. We defeated legal, political infrastructure of racist apartheid. To speak of his being such a forgiving man, winners are empowered to forgive or redeem. To forgive, you must first deal with the issue of repentance and contrition. This system repented. One about to be governed had the choice to forgive or to reject. He was shaped by the fire, the oven of apartheid externally, and his internal will to resist and willingness to fight back became that combination. He used his mind and his body and spirit to transform the order, legal demonstrations, and the military. He fought to change the law. A leader, internal will to fight back. Leaders mold opinion. Don't just follow opinion polls. Leaders sacrifice personal gratification for the higher, greater good. Leaders choose the laws of sacrifice, which leads to greatness, over the laws of convenience, which leads to collapse. We learn in the struggle. Literacy is the key to liberation. Strong minds break strong chains. He was an enlightened, literate man. Forgiveness, a key to reconciliation, requires repentance and contrition. White in jail. While in jail, he said, keep sanctions, end racist apartheid, free all political prisoners, end state of emergency, end passbooks, afford the right to vote, constitutional guarantees, legitimately elected democratic government on a non-racial basis. He helped change the world opinion against apartheid and made South African apartheid a pariah nation, inspired sanctions against state-sponsored terrorism. Apartheid. Whites had all U.S. and Britain privileges. They had the right to travel, educate, and trade and stock exchange. But in the end, South African apartheid, upon being defeated, repented with public contrition, saying skin level apartheid is wrong.
Poignantly, I rise to invite Dr. Naledi Pando to reflect on Reverend Jackson tonight. For me, this is a moment of tying together threads of activism, service, and solidarity. In that, in 2013, when Reverend Jackson delivered that speech, Dr. Pando spoke on the same podium as Reverend Jackson. At the time, she was Minister of Home Affairs in South Africa. Another speaker who spoke as well on that day is Ms. Eleanor Susudu, who I will refer to at the end for something that she said that I'm taking a leaf out of this evening. So, as I said then, Dr. Pando was Minister of Home Affairs. Today, Dr. Pando is the chair of the board of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Please join me in inviting Dr. Pando to share her reflections.
Of the board of the foundation, because when you leave government, people keep speaking of you as former, as though you don't exist. And so I keep scratching out former and putting chairperson of Nelson Mandela Foundation. So thank you to you, CEO. Allow me to recognize all the distinguished guests that are present here, particularly Ambassador Masekela. And really, seriously, thank you to you for coming here. I also wish to recognize the Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, Ms. Nomvula Mukonyane. And of course, our CEO, Dr. Buthelezi, who you've been listening to, the trustees of the foundation, and ladies and gentlemen, I recognize each and every one of you, and I thank you most sincerely for being here. We felt that it would be totally wrong for South Africa not to mark the passing of Reverend Jesse Jackson. And I must confess that it was in discussion with the Deputy Secretary General that she said, shouldn't the foundation do something? And I said, shouldn't the ANC do something? And in the end, we agreed that the foundation would do something. So thank you, DSJ. So I'm really pleased that you've been able to join us in marking the life of service and the indelible contribution to justice and equality of the recently departed civil rights leader, Reverend Jesse Jackson. The Nelson Mandela Foundation is currently implementing a 3-year strategic program under the theme, Kholihlahla, Making Good Trouble. We recognize the globe is confronted by deeply complex and dangerous circumstances which require men, women, and youth who will provide leadership by making good trouble, as Nelson Mandela once called for. Our founder, Mr. Nelson Mandela, strongly believed that human beings exist not merely to live, but to do things and to make a difference. This is why so much of what Mandela said and wrote, not to be passive and to be robust in advancing justice, equality, and freedom. He suggested in one of his talks that if you're not making a difference, you're really not living. We acknowledge that while Mr. Mandela utilized that call I've referred to, which is our strategic theme of making good trouble, and called on us to shake the tree of liberty, he joined a leader who had originally made that call for the need for people to make good trouble. That was Mr. John Lewis, who became a senator in the United States of America, a co-leader of the civil rights movement, who worked alongside Reverend Jesse Jackson and Reverend Martin Luther King. The civil rights movement in the United States of America played an important role in the international anti-apartheid solidarity movement. I don't know how many of you know what that is. If I asked you to stand up and give me 3 minutes on the international anti-apartheid solidarity movement, I don't know how many of you in this room can do that. But it is such an important part of our struggle against apartheid that I think all of us need to do something about learning about it, because we have forgotten that the denial of human rights should be a concern of all humanity, and that when we as South Africans said that to the world joined with us in fighting against apartheid. And certainly the civil rights movement in the United States was party to that. They joined our struggle through mounting protests that challenged and profiled legalized racial segregation and discrimination, and highlighted in particular the 2 countries in the world that had the worst manifestations of white supremacy oppression: South Africa and the United States of America. Reverend Jesse Jackson and his son, Congressman Jonathan Jackson, told me just 2 years ago of the story of being arrested during a protest outside the apartheid South African embassy in the early 80s in Washington. Congressman Jackson told me he was the youngest in the cells at that time. They, along with many Americans, recognized that crimes against humanity require global cooperation if they are to be effectively challenged. As has been said, Jesse Jackson was born in Greenville, Carolina. He was born to Helen Burns, an 18-year-old high school student, and Noah Louis Robinson, an adult neighbor of his mother's family. His mother married Charles Henry Jackson when Jesse was just 1 year old, and Mr. Jackson adopted Jesse, who assumed his surname. Jesse Jackson reported that he remained close to both men and spoke of himself as having 2 fathers. He cited his origins as giving him the impetus to succeed. He attended a racially segregated school in Greenville and achieved academic and sporting success despite experiencing racism. He decided to disobey racial laws through beginning his active participation at school level, but most particularly through activism in the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. The attitude he had toward the pursuit of justice was very important to him. I sought a meeting with him in 2023 to discuss a bill that was being piloted in the Congress of the United States and to ask for his help in lobbying against that piece of legislation. At that time, he was already in a wheelchair, but was very active in activities in support of the people of Palestine's quest for self-determination and sovereignty. And he granted me time with him and spoke very fondly of Mr. Mandela, who he loved a great deal, but most particularly of South Africa, which he regarded as a beacon of constitutional freedoms, and which he hoped would be the country that will show the world what respect for human dignity and basic human freedoms means. And so he regarded the action of South Africa of taking Israel to the International Court of Justice as an extremely appropriate action by a country committed to international solidarity, international law, and freedom of all peoples. I benefited greatly from that discussion. I think that as the global community, we have to begin to urgently consider how we may collectively prepare to repel the excesses that we're seeing today in the geopolitical sphere. And we need to move away from this apparent belief that reason might prevail. We are in an unreasonable season in world affairs, and we have to act. The world currently needs people who are unafraid of making good trouble and who are ready to create a world that is more just, more caring, and more responsive to upholding human dignity. Reverend Jackson reflected these qualities in his extraordinary life. He was a great civil rights leader, working side by side with Reverend Martin Luther King. He was also an ordained Baptist minister, so the fact that you're a priest doesn't mean you can't understand freedom. He was a Baptist minister who stood with the oppressed and was also a politician who was an activist for social justice. He gave practical effect to his social justice concerns by founding PUSH, People United to Serve Humanity, and the Rainbow Coalition, an organization that still advances community development and social justice up to today. In an extraordinary act for a civil rights leader in the unequal domain of America, he bravely ran 2 presidential primary candidate election campaigns in 1984 and 1988. His campaigns were remarkable in that for the first time, the lived experience of African Americans formed a visible part of a presidential campaign. Reverend Jackson made the experience of discrimination, of poverty, and of exclusion visible to America. He spoke for women supporting single-parent headed households and empathized directly with all who had experienced even one action of racism. While he confronted severely hostile campaigning and a negative backlash from wealthy, well-endowed white candidates, he put up a remarkable set of campaigns and was probably a positive example for President Barack Obama and other black candidates in America who have dared to challenge orthodoxy. Just like the first president of democratic South Africa, our Nelson Mandela, Reverend Jackson believed with freedom anything was possible, and that formerly oppressed people should never push themselves to the margins of society. They should lead and strive to achieve all their aspirations and live lives of hope that work to make a difference. In his famous 1984 campaign speech, he repeated the words, "I understand," more than a dozen times in referring to black lived experience, and then concluded his speech by calling on all his supporters and all the oppressed to always have hope and to never give up striving for better. That "I understand" rings in my head as I recall him. I understand what it means to be a poor teenage mother. I understand what it means not to have shoes for school. I understand what it means to never have had a job. But always have hope and never give up striving for better. Thank you very much to all of you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Pando, for reminding us that we are in an unreasonable season in which more and more of us need to make good trouble. Otherwise, we would not have lived. And thank you as well for disclosing my secrets. I had deliberately, in my introduction, not disclosed who the speakers are going to be. I will be disclosing them one by one as I invite them to come and speak. But Dr. Pando was in government for so long that protocol is really important. And in doing so, she's now given away who I'm going to be inviting to speak. Allow me then to invite reflections from Ambassador Barbara Masekela next. It is an honor to invite former South African ambassador to the United States, who also was in an earlier life chief of staff to Nelson Mandela from 1990 to 1995, and played a really important role during South Africa's democratic transition. She, of course, is a stalwart of the anti-apartheid movement, an activist, a poet, a diplomat, who also served as South Africa's ambassador to France, to UNESCO, and of course to the United States. More recently, she's been the founder of the Johannesburg Festival of Women Writers, which is taking place this weekend. And of course, the author of a memoir, Poli Poli, which was published in 2022. Ambassador Masekela.
Good evening, everybody. I think I forgot my glasses. Someone said that there are glasses for people who are all over 50. They wear the same glasses, so you don't need special ones. It is fitting that we have gathered here at the Nelson Mandela Foundation to honor and celebrate the life of Reverend Jesse Jackson, a great freedom fighter and a lover of his people in Africa and all over the world. It is something that Dr. Nelson Mandela would have done himself, because he had an abiding admiration and respect for this man, whom he considered his son and his leader. Jesse Jackson was admired for his ability to be at the right place at the right time. So it was not surprising that he was one of the first of our brethren from the United States of America to arrive in South Africa when the old man was released from jail. There are two compatriots of ours who should be here today, but they're not, Lindiwe Mabuza and Johnny Makatini. They worked very, very closely with Reverend Jesse Jackson, and I think that it would have been appropriate for them. I think that today is also a day for a little bit of history. Because as my sister Naledi Pando has pointed out, there are things that we must speak about and which we must teach the generations that come after us. And that we have neglected that duty. And I'm glad that she has also pointed out the relationship between the struggles in America and in the diaspora, the African diaspora, and our own struggle, particularly in our country at this time. Because I must say that sometimes I blush at what some of my compatriots, how they refer to people from other countries. And as has been pointed out already, our liberation is something that we won with our own sacrifices and our own courage, but we did not do it alone. We were assisted by the whole world. And I think one of the things perhaps that I should say also is that we were very fortunate to have a leader like Oliver Tambo, because Oliver Tambo was the architect of our international solidarity campaigns. And he was able to marshal people from every walk of life in every country to support us. But not only did it benefit ourselves, but it benefited them as well, because in order for them to support us, they had to admit that like us, they were human beings, and what was being done to us was being done to them directly. And this, more than anything today in this uncertain world, is something that we need to remember, and that we ought to remind ourselves that what is occurring in parts of the world and what is being done to people in Palestine, what is being done to people who are being oppressed in Iran, is being done to ourselves, and that it will be done to ourselves if we do not do something about it. also thought that today is also a day in which we have to remember Jesse Jackson in the context of the fact that the solidarity between people in Southern Africa and in the rest of the world did not begin with the anti-apartheid struggle, but that it is something that we can trace back to even earlier generations. The generation of the Nkrumahs, of the W.E.B. Du Boises, of the many, many Africans who studied in the United States and had an opportunity to see how Black people were treated. It gave them an education, but at the same time, the African Americans were also able to get an education from us about colonialism, and they learned about colonialism. So what we see in Reverend Jesse Jackson is something that has always been a tradition in history. There have always been links between people of color who have suffered from colonialism and racism. So solidarity is something that is a legacy that we have inherited and which we must continue to strengthen and build, not only for ourselves, but for the generations to come, because our young people have not had the experience of apartheid. They do not even know about slavery, some of them. And in fact, as South Africans ourselves, we did not even know about slavery in our own country. I am one of the people who had, I don't know whether I want to call it an opportunity. Anyway, I studied in the United States. And I must say that one of the things that was key to my growth was the civil rights movement in the United States, because I could see it as something that I myself had suffered. But we were also lucky, my generation, because we were in the United States at a time of great activism. You know, the Angela Davises, you know, the Jesse Jacksons, those were the heroes of the time. And we were able to keep our links with our own liberation movement because we had the example before us of the Jesse Jacksons. What is remarkable to me about Reverend Jesse Jackson is that I think in terms of caring about the inner life of Black people, that he was unique. Because I think that generally speaking, we tend to focus on the material changes that we want to bring about through freedom. And we've done so in South Africa. And it was correct to do so, to care about hospitals, about schools, about those things you could touch and feel, about housing, etc. And I think, though, that we have not followed Jesse Jackson in caring as deeply about the spirit, the soul of our people. And I think Jesse Jackson was unique in that. I speak, of course, also as a cultural activist. because I think that that is the only way we can change the spirit of our people, by providing them with the cultural exposure that touches more than the fact that they want to have Adidas shoes, or you know, they want to have a dress like Beyonce's, or you know, those material things, but something that we cannot touch, something which is their imagination, and something that arms them to look at the world not entirely in terms of their victimhood, but in terms of what they can become. Because that's what the imagination does, and that is what culture does. It shows you that those things that we speak about, the humanity, are not just abstract.
All right, and we take you out of the Nelson Mandela Foundation memorial service in honor of Jesse Jackson.